gracious, we all miss Greg enormously. What a terrible loss and what a great shock. It's interesting. Sometimes out of some elements of sadness, there can be momentary goodness. Today's very timely program is actually made possible by a sad day for John Swafford, a former East Chapel Hill Rotarian who was to have been our speaker today. And he is, as we speak, now speaking at a friend's funeral and had to cancel out. So Freddie Kiger and I will interview John at our meeting on August 20th, just before the football season. A few weeks ago, in a conversation before the meeting during the chat session, it involved us interrogating Chief Chris Blue for his views on the national controversies surrounding police shootings. Clearly, he has a lot to tell us and agreed to speak today. His terrific biography is in this week's bulletin. I'm not going to take up his time to recite all of that. I encourage you to take a look at it. It's very impressive. I do remind you, though, that he graduated from UNC and has a graduate degree from NC State, so he can speak foreign languages. A leader among his peers, also, he is widely respected in North Carolina. He is president of the North Carolina Police Executives Association. And in 2020, he was elected chair of the North Carolina Criminal Justice Education and Training Standards Commission. So he's very active in addressing the actions and policies that have the nation's attention. But meanwhile, to get us going, I thought, well, we need to think about something with a little levity in it. So as we welcome Chief Chris Blue, because he is a public figure, everybody sees his biography, but I asked Chris if he could tell us some things about himself that no one knows, because he's in our family now, and maybe he could tell us a few of his secrets. So Chief Blue, we look forward to your serious comments, but first, tell us something about you that nobody knows.
Well, thank you, Jim. And it's good to be with everybody today. And Jim asked me to send him a couple different ideas of icebreakers. And I sent him 3. And immediately after I sent them, I had a little bit of remorse. I thought, I think I probably told him a little too much. So, but then he said, why don't you just pick which one you want to share? So I get to give you the more sanitized of 3, and maybe you can talk the other 2 out of him as a sidebar conversation. Yeah, one of the things I just wanted to share, and it occurred to me, I haven't ever talked to Jim about this, I don't think, in the many years we've known each other and worked together, that my first job interview I ever had when I was finishing up my broadcasting degree at UNC, Radio, Television, Motion Pictures, for some of you who may remember that, was with WCHL. I applied for a job there, actually in their advertising department. And I don't know if it's still the pattern and practice with WCHL, but I know for many years, for you to get hired there, you had to interview with just about everybody on the payroll, I think. Ultimately culminating in, assuming I suppose that you've made it successfully through each one, ultimately culminating in an interview with Jim. And so I get to my interview with Jim thinking I got this thing in the bag because I've probably done a half dozen interviews. And I come in there, and again, I'll remind you, it's my first real series of job interviews. And I was very inexperienced and probably not worth hiring. And as it turns out, Jim figured that out because he didn't hire me. But I do remember him asking me some interview questions I'd never heard before, and frankly didn't have the good sense to have predicted. And I remember a couple times he'd ask a question and he's taking good notes, as y'all would imagine Jim would. And occasionally I would give an answer that struck me that it must have been so bad, because he would stop and actually look up, I think looking at me like, is that really the best you can come up with? So in any case, he probably made the very wise decision for his organization to not hire me. But I will say, Jim, in front of all of our fellow Rotarians here, I learned probably much more from that interview because you didn't hire me than I would have if you had. So thank you for that. And another time, I'll tell you more about my experience with interviewing with Jim, because he had me scared to death. So thanks for letting me share that. And again, the other 2 stories I shared with him, I'll save those for another time. I have pulled together a bunch of slides today to just kind of guide our discussion. I'm going to go, and it's way more than we have time to talk about, and I'm going to go through them very quickly because I really want to get to some Q&A. That's the best part, in my opinion, of any chance I have to get out and talk to folks about our work and about safety in our communities. is hearing from the people that we serve and hearing their questions and concerns and feedback and advice, most importantly. So I'm gonna click through some slides here if I can get it. There we go. Okay. All right. So we really can't get together and talk about policing at all right now without reflecting on the events. I would really go back to Ferguson and the killing of Michael Brown, but certainly the last year or so with Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, and sadly many others, including just a few within the last week or so. You just you cannot talk about policing right now without reflecting on the current climate and the complex way forward. So I just want to talk a little bit about what, what we see as important.
Yeah, I'm listening to my Rotary meeting and I'm kind of slowly unpacking the car.
You want me to bring in stuff from the car?
Yeah, I'll show you.
Can everybody mute, please, other than Chris Blue?
Thank you, everybody. Just I want to quickly, at some point in time in our discussion today, we might want to talk about that idea of defunding the police. And I think it's actually an interesting concept to explore. So I just want to quickly show you how we spend your tax dollars in Chapel Hill when it comes to community safety. And this probably is true in many organizations, if not most. Overwhelmingly, our people are where our funds are spent. Almost 90% of our budget goes to salary and benefits for our outstanding employees, contracted services, and taking care of our police fleet and replacing the roof on the police department, those kinds of things, which are really not discretionary and I don't have much control over them, make up another pretty significant percentage of our budget. So I'm left with 2 or 3% of our overall budget that is discretionary in any way. And I think that looms large in our conversations about defunding the police and has implications there, but I think there's a way forward too. Just a quick overview of some of our structure. This won't be surprising to anybody who's ever seen a cop movie. We have a patrol division that is made up of the folks who are out there in uniforms and black and white police cars. They're the ones that come to your 911 call when you call us. We've got outstanding investigators who do case follow-up and case management, who do a great job. We could always use a few more of each. Just a quick overview of our calls for service. You might be surprised to know in 2019, 2020, of course, an anomaly for all of us in so many ways, but 2019, a fairly normal year, almost 37,000 911 calls come in. Each one of them taking an average of a 15-minute average for those calls. So our folks stay pretty busy for a fairly small community. I have a full-time officer who does nothing but ensure that our people are doing the right thing. He takes complaints from community members, and maybe more importantly, from where I sit as a police agency head, is he takes complaints from fellow employees, supervisors, and others who know the inner workings of our organization when there's concern that maybe we're not doing the right thing or that we need to examine an employee or a practice to ensure that we're holding up the high standards of integrity that we require of our folks. What I want to quickly, one more thing about our professional standards, and I really mean this, and I'm going to say this for everybody on this call, and I encourage you to share it far and wide. We take every single complaint, concern, question seriously. They are all explored and investigated. And you can write a formal letter. You can come in and meet with my professional standards sergeant. You can put it on a sticky note on the front door of the police department. Doesn't matter. We take them all seriously. We investigate every single one of them. And thankfully, we find out our folks do the right thing overwhelmingly, but sometimes they don't. And we deal with that promptly and appropriately. And I want to make sure everybody on this call has my cell phone number. It's 919-612-8900. And I know many of you do. I encourage you to use it if you ever see us behaving in any way less than what you expect and demand of your police department. I can't talk about our department without talking about our crisis unit. Those of you who are paying attention to the national conversation right now about alternatives to policing and ways to meet community concerns without sending a cop, hear an awful lot about this idea of co-responder models or crisis units or mental health case management teams, and which is a fantastic idea. It's such a great idea that we started in the town of Chapel Hill back in the early 1970s. So for almost 50 years now, we've had an embedded unit of master's level clinicians, social workers embedded in our police department, 5 of them, 24 hours a day. We have social work response capability to critical incidents in our community, to serious assaults, to death notifications, to help victims of violent crime. It was a groundbreaking thing 50 years ago when it was started. It's still unbelievably rare, but we're really pleased and encouraged to see how many communities are thinking about starting this team now. And my crisis unit supervisor particularly is, no kidding, probably 2 or 3 times a week doing presentations nationally right now, telling people about the benefits of such a model. And I'll say more about that, I'm sure, when we get to Q&A. Just a quick pie chart that points out the kinds of things our crisis unit finds in their work. And not surprisingly, 40% of the cases in which they're involved, have some mental health component. Now, these are, and there may be multiple components that are found in this pie chart that show up in those crisis unit calls, but 40% of what they do is involving folks who are presenting with mental health concerns. And you see the distribution across other categories there. Quite honestly, law enforcement is not the right answer for mental health. I'm certainly good for mental health responses. I'm really glad we have a crisis team here to help with kind of triaging and stabilization, but our communities are underserved when it comes to mental health. And police department ain't the right answer, and you all know that. Same for homelessness and others. And we'll say more about that shortly. I threw this up just quickly as a quick snapshot of what crime in Chapel Hill looks like. And it's the blue bar there on the left. I've got comparisons with Durham and Raleigh and North Carolina. And I put that up there just quickly to show you that this reminds you, it's a very safe place to be. The bulk of our police calls for service have to do with property crime, as opposed to crimes against a person. And I'm glad to report that. And we're working real hard to have that continue to be the case. So I want to talk just a little bit. So that was just a quick overview, a flyby to kind of give you some baseline information before we move into just talking a little bit about a way forward. In our field, we collect so much information. From the minute you call 911, we start asking questions and collecting information and writing police reports. And we have so much data. But for many, many years, no one in our profession, we should be ashamed of this, stopped and looked at, what do our data tell us? What does our activity look like? And are we disproportionately engaging with some members of our community in a way that's different than others, and in a way that makes it difficult for those folks in our community to be successful? Back in 1999, our legislature passed a law that said we must record data on every single traffic stop that your agency conducts. Any agency that serves a community with a population of 10,000 or more is required to submit a form to the state of North Carolina on every single traffic stop. And they have to talk about the demographics of the person they stop, the reason for the stop, any enforcement outcomes that may have happened, any evidence or contraband that was seized there, some information about the location of the stop. Lots and lots of information, and millions upon millions of traffic stops are done every year across the state of North Carolina. It was really smart to collect that data. What wasn't so smart was the fact that nobody did any analysis of it until around 2008. So we had reams of information sitting there, nobody looking at it. In 2008, a professor here at UNC, and you all have heard from him in a conversation here a few months ago, Frank Baumgartner, did the first real exhaustive analysis of traffic stops in North Carolina. And he found what probably all of us could have said anyway without the data analysis, is that poor folks and folks from communities of color disproportionately stopped, cited, and searched by law enforcement. I mean, just in the discrepancies are just staggering. On the other hand, seeing that data and seeing how clear the problems are, gave us a way forward, and we could really start thinking about what are the activities, the discretionary decisions that we're making as law enforcement officers that we could think differently about, and that might address some of those disparities. And there's just a few here, and I won't do a deep dive on any of these very much. But when it comes to searching cars, police officers in the aggregate request to search a vehicle of African-American drivers 2 and 3 times more than they do of white drivers. And I'm painting with broad strokes here, but generally that's the case. In very, very small percentages of those searches is any contraband ever found historically, but we continued to ask until we started getting serious about doing something about that. Same with marijuana charges. The chances of you getting charged with a low-level possession charge if you are a young African-American male is 4 or 5 times more than if you're a white soccer mom in your minivan. You get stopped a little joint in your ashtray. The numbers are just staggering. So I want to just quickly show you a little bit about traffic enforcement in our community. The bulk of where we spend our traffic enforcement is on speeding, which is what I suspect you would want us to do. You can see there on the left, those are traffic citations since 2019, and overwhelmingly they're for speeding. That's good, but that's not by accident. We have really made an effort to not stop people for low-level, non-safety related equipment or regulatory kinds of violations. Why? Because we know that that's where disparities happen. In the aggregate, we were just not stopping anybody except minority drivers. And that's true across the nation. It's true across North Carolina. And sadly, until we started paying attention to it, it was true in Chapel Hill too. I'll just show you this quickly just to say that, because one of the things that we're really trying hard to do is minimize custodial physical arrests. In other words, taking somebody into custody, putting handcuffs on them and taking them before the magistrate and potentially to the jail. Where custodial arrests are still happening, those in the area of DWI, and that's appropriate. We have to make an arrest to collect evidence in order to prosecute successfully DWI cases. And I don't have any concern about that, but us making arrests for low-level misdemeanors that are nonviolent otherwise, too often racial disparities are showing up in those decisions as well, and we have made a real conscious decision to not arrest unless we absolutely need to. A couple examples of where we do. I mentioned DWI already, and again, that's important for evidence collection, and also in domestic violence, where we have a statutory obligation to make a custodial arrest in cases of domestic violence. Other than that, our physical arrests are down dramatically. Just those 2 charges right there over the last 2 years account for 40% of all of our arrests. And what we're finding again, when we try to bring some policy interventions around the decision to make a custodial arrest, we're seeing those disparities even out and improve, which I'm glad to say. Let me move through some of this quickly. So I mentioned about marijuana already. We have deprioritized low-level possession of marijuana in our community to where we really just don't mess with it unless there's some other aggravating circumstance associated with it. Maybe the one makes the most sense would be if we stop you for some erratic or dangerous driving and discover that when the window comes down, it's like a Cheech and Chong movie and a plume of smoke comes out. It's very likely that we're going to conduct a DWI investigation there, and it's also very likely that you'll be charged with drug impaired driving. Otherwise, very few custodial arrests happening, period, and hardly any around low-level misdemeanor marijuana. And I'm sure that's going to be a great news for some of you on this call. I want to just quickly talk about recruitment and hiring because I'm concerned about law enforcement. Applications to law enforcement agencies nationally are down at staggering numbers. And I'll be honest with you, those who are applying, most of the time we don't want them. And it's a real concern. I show here on the left what the minimum requirements are to be a police officer in North Carolina. And they're not very impressive, as you can see there. It's a fairly low bar, and we're still not finding great candidates. There's some additional things we ask of our applicants there in the lower right-hand corner that raise the bar some, and I'm proud of that, but we still need to do more. We incentivize education here, and you can see a significant percentage of our officers have a bachelor's degree, and we have a number of them with a master's degree. And serving in a college town, I think it's certainly advantageous to have had your own college experience. Still struggling to get diverse applicants. Most of our police officers look a lot like me, and we need to look more like the community we're representing. We have a police academy class that we're about to graduate next week, actually. It's the most diverse class we've had in a long time. I'm excited about that. And I do think applicants who recognize themselves in the police force will be more likely to throw their name in the hat for future employment. So I'm going to go through some of these slides really quickly and get to Q&A. I mentioned consent searches. We're trying very hard to require, let me come back. We will not allow you to do a consent search of someone's vehicle. And that just means saying, hey, do you mind if I search your car? Which again is a way that an awful lot of searches happen. And rarely do they yield anything meaningful. What we now require is if officer wants to do a consent search, they got to fill out a bunch of paperwork to do it. And surprise, they don't want to do it very much anymore. What I will also tell you, without getting too wonky here, is our probable cause searches of vehicles, meaning those searches that you don't need consent for, because you have reached that legal threshold where you believe there's probable cause that evidence of a crime is present in that vehicle. And that requires better policing, more investigation on the side of the road, more skillful question and answer with the person with whom you're interacting. Is a lot more work than just simply saying, can I search your car, yes or no? What we know is that probable cause searches, our hit rate now, in other words, we finding contraband, is up at about 75 or 80%. That means that when we're doing a search, it's fruitful, it's good, we're finding drugs and guns, and that's a good thing. And those consent searches are virtually non-existent. And we, again, knew that's an area of great disparity. Let's see, I'm gonna move through that real quickly. This is really the last slide before I get to some Q&A. A way forward. Some things we're thinking about here locally is right-sizing the police department. So I'm gonna call back to the defund the police discussion. In our community, we've had budget for somewhere between 117 or 120 police officers for as long as I can remember, since long before I became chief. And we haven't had that many officers on the books in 10 years, probably. In fact, we've got about a third fewer than that 120 right now on the books. And I need more than that, but I don't need 120. So when we think a little bit about defunding the police, I don't think that's a dirty word, although some communities had a strong reaction to that concept. I don't have a strong reaction to it, except to say responsible allocation of our government resources is our obligation. It's what you expect of us. And for us to think about how we spend those dollars and maybe consider we don't need quite as many cops. And maybe some of those salaries that we won't use for police officers this year could go to shore up some of those mental health services at the street level that we desperately need in our community. Maybe some percentage of those unspent salaries could go to pay increases here for our high quality, excellent officers and create demand for future officers here. You know, what I want is a line of potential Chapel Hill police officers stretched down the block. People who want to come here, want to be part of a special kind of policing. With that motivation, we can implement any reform that's out there and we can do it well, and we lead the way for the rest of North Carolina and our country. Consider alternative ways to enforce the law. Red light cameras, speeding cameras, accident investigation by non-sworn officers. There are communities that are exploring those kinds of things, and it's a way to minimize interactions of sworn officers. Now, by the way, I want to say something real quick. I have great confidence in our officers. They do a wonderful job. But what we also know is there are times that we get dispatched to a 911 call because there's just nobody else to call. And we may not be the right answer, but we happen to be the ones who are there prepared to answer, able to answer the call, available to answer the call. We may not be the best person to dispatch. And I think it's time for us to get serious about that. I think I will go to Q&A because I said threw a whole lot at you. And I'm really interested in what you all think. So let's see, is it okay if I just call on people?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, Linda, what's on your mind?
So Chris, first of all, thanks very much, and a very big thank you to both you and your police department. What might be an ask that you would make of us that we can do as citizens to best serve and partner with you and your police department?
Thank you. Well, I think a couple things. One, we have a good story to tell. I'm really proud of what we do here, and this is a model agency for many other agencies across the state of North Carolina, and we always need help telling the story. So one thing is invite us to your other standing meetings that you have, groups with which you're affiliated, who speakers want to hear about crisis response, want to hear about crime in our community, or more importantly, crime prevention in our community, who want to know what the challenges are. Let us get in front of groups and talk about the things of which we're proud and the things that concern us. I would also say pay attention. I won't tell you what to think. I'll just say pay attention to conversations about policing in your community. Because there certainly are folks who think we need to cut our staffing dramatically. I'm not totally convinced that I agree with that all the way, but as I said before, I am about right sizing our staffing. But I think you all as taxpayers need to be heard. You have an opinion too. And so I would say pay attention to these discussions, particularly as we move into budget season this year, because I feel confident that they will loom large in our budget conversations this year. And we're glad to be part of that. As I said, I don't need 120 cops. What I need is probably 100 outstanding cops, and we can take care of an awful lot that way. So thank you for asking. And I would just say, just keep up with what's going on and make sure your opinion is heard. I think Brian was up next.
Thanks, Chris, very much. Chris, two questions. Number one is gangs. Do we have a problem here? We hear you go to some parts of the world and parts of countries are controlled by gangs. Secondly, Chris, we're not supposed to profile. How in the world do you not profile? I see you walking down the street and I say, there's a fairly decent looking fellow. He might wear a beard, might be a bit of a hippie, but and yet then I see someone else walking down the street who's just not my kind. So how do you stop that? Great
question. Tell me your first question again. I apologize.
Gangs.
Yeah. So we certainly have young people here who are struggling to find their way, and who sometimes come together and behave in ways that are harmful to them or others. But the scale of that is very, very small here. I'm knocking on wood. It really is. And we've got some outstanding youth services here that are a big part of that. And obviously model school systems too. Not without their warts, but all in all, we've been very, very fortunate here. But there is no question that our community, our neighbor on the other side of I-40 has a serious gang problem. And occasionally that spills over here. And we do have that experience. And that's not to blame anything on Durham, by the way. I'm simply saying they just got some challenges that fortunately we've been mostly immune from. So do I think we have a huge gang problem here? I do not. Do we have some young people who need support and guidance and help? Absolutely. Although the scale of that here is much smaller than what we're seeing in some other communities. And I think I could say the same for Carrboro, by the way. With respect to profiling, I think talking about profiling is kind of talking about, is akin to talking about, do you have racist cops? And when people ask me that, I say, I don't know. I can't measure that. What I can measure is what they do. And that goes back to that data point before, we do an awful lot of discretionary self-initiated activity and collect a lot of information about that activity. And we make decisions about charging or warning or making an arrest or using force. And that I can analyze. And if I see an officer who the only time he or she uses force, the only car they stop for some low-level irrelevant violation is someone from a community of color, it's hard for me not, whether I call it profiling or not, it's hard for me not to have to take a deeper look at that. all right? Because I just do not believe that the only people who are committing crimes in our community are from the minority community. We just know that's not true. But if our activities and our enforcement actions by an individual or by a unit or by the department itself suggest that, then you got a big problem. And is that profiling? Yeah, maybe so. And the other thing I'll say about that is, you know, our police officers are drawn from the community, and they see this, they are conditioned, sadly, to see the same things that we as community members at large see, which is disproportionate representation of minorities on the news, committing crime. Plenty of white people committing crime who don't show up on the news. Let a young black man commit a low-level crime and his picture will be on the news. All right. We'd be lying to each other if we didn't say that had effect on the way we see each other in the world. That's a whole lot more complicated than I'll ever be able to solve. But what I can do is measure what you do as an employee. And if I see the output of your work disproportionately impacting one member of our community or another, I can deal with that. I can take action on that. I can put policies in place that address it. We touched on a couple of those earlier. And I think that's the way forward, and continuing to talk about, you know, you can't, what's that old saying about you can expect what you inspect. So we have got to get serious, continue to be serious about data analysis, confronting the ugly truths that are found in policing as a profession, and get after it and show our communities we're not afraid of talking about that stuff, even though it can be painful and ugly. Let's see, I'm just going in order across my screen. Peggy?
Thank you. When I look at the tragic stories that we hear in the news, very often it looks like the mistake that is, well, no, I shouldn't say that. The shooting occurs not because of what the victim is doing, but because the victim is not obeying police commands. And we seem to be in a really bad, vicious circle where minority communities are so terrified or have been led to think that they are more likely to get shot, that when a policeman tries to have them stop or arrest them, they want to run because they think they're running for their life. And that seems to give the cop the license to shoot. But if they know who they've got, why bother shooting? Why not wait until they can catch up with them some other time?
Well, you hit the nail on the head, and I'm puppy sitting today. Shows you what professional outfit I'm running here. So pardon me. You hit the nail on the head, and I'd love to come back and do a whole conversation about police use of force and what the law allows. The problem is so much of our training as a profession in law enforcement is intended to help us think about what you can, let me see, what's the best way to say this? What you can do, not what you should do. I just think about the first days of police training, and this is true pretty much across national training settings, is we spend too much time talking about what's an allowable use of force as opposed to what are the optimal ways to avoid encounters that statistically can lead to force, right? I mean, you look at, and I don't know anything more than what you all know from reading the headlines about these high-profile national cases, but I will just use the Breonna Taylor example or the Brown case in Elizabeth City last week as two good examples. Those are decisions. To go serve those warrants, those are decisions. These are discretionary decisions, and how they are served is up to the agency head, up to the operational commanders on the ground there, and you can make those better or worse, and it's a choice. And I'm not second guessing either of those cases in terms of the facts that I don't know, but what I will say is somebody made a decision to greenlight those operations. And I guarantee you that there's always a better way, which even when you do it exactly as you planned, there were probably 10 ways that were better. And as a profession, we're not very good, sadly, at acknowledging that. That was kind of a rambling answer, but I will say talking about use of force to me comes down to avoiding the situations where force is likely to happen. That's our responsibility. I don't put that on citizens. A scared citizen who runs away from me, that doesn't give me an excuse to harm them, even though many agencies try to use that excuse. I apologize, folks. So we've gone a little bit long. I want to get Elizabeth's, let's see who, Elizabeth's question, and then I'll wrap up.
Liz, are you still on the call?
Sorry, I am on the call, sorry. Thanks, Chief Blue. How are you addressing the lack of equity, of diversity, sorry, in your force? And in particular, what are you doing to encourage women to join your police force? Are you offering daycare? Are you offering maternity leave? I think it's very important, the diversity issue, not just for skin color, but also to encourage more women to join your force.
Absolutely.
How are you doing that? I know it's something you want to do, but how are you doing it?
First off, let me say, not well enough. But what we are doing, I think holds promise. First off, we're trying very hard to put both women and minority employees in influential positions here. I have had 2 African-American men as assistant chiefs in my time as chief. And I have our first female assistant chief that we've ever had working with me right now. And I'll let you know a little secret. I hope she'll be your next police chief, by the way. And we're working very hard to position her to be just that. That's one thing, is putting folks in positions where they can shine and be role models for applicants. Because again, if you look at our agency, it's mostly white guys. And I can tell you, we got plenty of those. So I need to put folks out there who look like the community we serve. And we know we serve more than just white men here. Our community, our town rather, has done a really good job around family leave. So I feel good about what we do with respect to women who work for us who need to be out for childcare, for delivery and childcare, and the town has made a serious commitment to setting aside lots of time for folks to do that. I'm proud of that. The child care discussion is something that we have talked about as a town and as a department. Haven't made much progress on that yet, but I'm encouraged by the discussion so far.
Thank you.
I hate to wrap up, but y'all probably don't hate for me to wrap up. It's been really good being with you. I've got to jump off to another call, but I hope you'll, maybe next week I'll get on a little early and we can follow up on some questions we didn't get to today.
Chief Blue, thank you so much for your time today. It was fantastic. We're grateful for all that you do for our community, and we are grateful for you sharing time with us again today.
Thank you all so much.
Thanks, Chris.
Bye-bye. Thank you.